In today's episode, we're speaking to Dr. Darnyelle Jervey Harmon. Dr. Harmon is a God girl, an award-winning business growth strategist, multi-millionaire business mentor, and an Inc. 5000 CEO. Her journey began in chaotic circumstances, born to drug-addicted parents and facing challenges that would have discouraged many. However, she defied the odds, broke belief barriers, and emerged as a disruptor in the business world. Let's speak to Dr. Harmon and work out and find out how she changed her life by changing her mindset. Let's find out. Welcome, welcome. This is Gull, your money mindset expert. And today I'm so excited. We're speaking to the wonderful, the amazing Dr. Darnyelle Jervey Harmon. Is that correct? Did I butcher your name at all, Dr.
No,
Darnyelle?
you're
I'm so
good.
sorry. Awesome. So, Dr. Darnyelle, everyone's heard how amazing you are. They've heard your intro, but please, in your own words, tell everybody what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I am a multifaceted business advisory consultant. So I help entrepreneurs and small business owners understand how to build the foundation that's going to support a business that they can scale to and sustain at the $1 million mark and beyond. And so we look at the entire business infrastructure. Unlike a lot of business coaches that might specialize in one piece of the puzzle, we look at the entire puzzle. So through our Move to Millions methodology, we're looking at their strategy, their sales infrastructure, their systems, their support mechanisms, their success mindset, their spiritual principles, and self-care practices, and how all of that integrates into helping them to be the CEO of a company that serves them both financially and spiritually. And as a result of that, I love the work that we do because we don't just work with coaches or consultants. We get to work with accountants and attorneys and interior designers and engineers and lots of different service-based businesses. So it really keeps us fresh of what's happening in the various industries to give them strategies that allows them to build businesses that do serve them. And in the last 10 years, our clients have generated a combined $378 million. And since 2021, we've helped 70 clients have their first or next seven-figure year.
Absolutely fantastic. Whoa, what amazing stats. So let's talk about your journey. Now, I know what you do for other people, but in this particular segment, we're interested in your journey. Now, I've done a little bit of background on you, and I'm excited to hear from you, literally from the horse's mouth. How did you get here? Your journey has been phenomenal, with the ups and downs and the things you've been through. And I've just literally touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued to see where you started and how you are where you are. You're part of Inc. 5000, and that's just a phenomenal place to be as a woman of color. And I'm talking as a woman of color as well.
Right.
I know the struggles that you have gone through, apart even without knowing the ins and outs of your story, but I do know. So I'm just really keen to hear your story. Please start.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start at the beginning.
Yeah, that's the best place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born to drug addicted turned crack addicted parents in the projects of Wilmington, Delaware. My mom went to jail when I was 8, and we went to live with my father, who married my stepmother, who did not want us there. Mm. And so I used to hear her on the phone talking to her girlfriends or her mother saying, I just wish Jeannie, that was my mom, would come and get her children. Like my mom was down the street and not in prison. And so from a very young age, there was a disassociation with purpose and not really clear about why I was here. But I had a teacher in the 5th grade, Mrs. Dixon. I talk about this in my book, Move to Millions, who changed my life when she introduced me to a journal. And as a result of the exercise of her having me write every time I got upset, which was a lot, I realized my purpose, Gull. I realized that my purpose was to change people's lives with the words that come out of my mouth. I realized that at the age of 10. Wow. And so my mission very early became, how do I use words to help people change their lives? And what does that look like? So initially it was voraciously studying the English language. So much so that I got a perfect verbal SAT score. and
Wow.
went to college on a full academic scholarship studying English. And it transferred into a desire to be an author and eventually a desire that was rebirthed in me after graduating college. I went to work in corporate America. I was there for 12 years. I did progress relatively quickly. Within 3 years, I was a vice president running my own department. And then I literally woke up one day in 2004 and realized that I was not born to sit behind someone else's desk. And so I quit my job without a plan. And when I first quit the job, I decided I had a part-time business selling Mary Kay cosmetics. So I decided to go full-time as a beauty consultant. I ended up becoming a sales director and then a top sales director and then an independent executive pink Cadillac sales director, all within 2 years.
Mm.
And then in 2007, it was like God tapped me on my shoulder and said, Yoo-hoo, you're not doing your purpose. Your purpose is to use words to change people's lives. And so it was at that point that I decided to start my company, Incredible One Enterprises. In our first iteration, I was a motivational speaker, and my job was to get booked on stages to tell my story. I wrote my very first book, and I cold called to book 25 paid speaking engagements because I knew that if I was going to be taken seriously as a speaker, I needed to be a member of the National Speakers Association. And to become a member, you needed to have 25 paid talks under your belt. So I booked my 25 paid talks, became a member of the NSA, and quickly realized that speaking on stage for money I clearly wasn't charging enough was not going to allow me to have the kind of life I wanted to live. So I ended up running out of money, filing bankruptcy, going back to work, all of this inside of 2 years. And when I went back and took that job, I made a promise to myself. Number one, I signed a contract for 2 years. So I knew I was only going to work there for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, I needed to be ready to run my own company and to run it at the six-figure level.
Mm.
So I took my last day at that job, December the 17th, 2010, January 1st, 2011. I came back into the business full time. And by this time, I realized that just being a speaker wasn't going to be enough. So I was a coach who spoke. So I would get on stages to speak, to inspire, and to rally up clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing that, my first year out, I generated $143,000 and we doubled every year. By 2014, I had a seven-figure coaching business. And I'll stop there because I'm sure there are lots of questions you want to ask me based on that part that I shared with you so far.
Well, I do. And the very first, I want to go back to the beginning because the things you've said to me have really struck a chord. I can't relate to having a parent who was a drug addict who went to prison. But I did grow up in a council estate in London, and in what probably one worst part of London at that time, Walthamstow. And my brother went into juvie because he had loads of trouble and so forth. And as a person of color, now I understand the reasons why, because our surroundings were, we're in poverty and loads of things happening and so forth. So I can see the determination that you had. I'm also I'm dyslexic as well. So I had to work really extremely hard. And I went back to thinking as a child how hard I worked. Even though I had no concept of what dyslexia was, but I worked really hard, but I didn't know anything better. And I can imagine you as a child not knowing anything else apart from working hard and that's how you got your grades to be perfect and you ended up getting scholarship for uni. However, as I've gone down my journey of myself and I look back, I had someone who was cheering me along all along the way. My mother, she was my biggest cheerleader. She supported me. To her, I was the smartest person on the planet, most beautiful girl on the planet. It was just, there was no question about it. Who was your cheerleader? Who supported you? How did you, because I know there are dark moments, especially when you work really hard. And I remember, I was dyslexic, so I could barely write English. English was a major issue for me, hence I excelled in maths and other subjects. Who was your cheerleader? How did you initially build that self-belief that I can do this?
Yeah, the very first was Mrs. Dixon, my fifth grade teacher. She was my fifth and sixth grade teacher. And then there were a host of teachers and guidance counselors along the way. My father was, I mean, I believe he did the best that he could with what he had. He was an addict. He was completely functional. He would get up and go to work every day. We never didn't have a place to live. We never didn't have food to eat. Like he took care of our basic necessities, and he still had this huge monkey on his back, right? Like I don't know, like you can't imagine having a parent who went to jail, and I can't imagine being an addict and allowing a substance to control me. I cannot imagine it, but that's where I come from. And so I understood and respected the fact that in spite of this addiction, he still took care of us. Like that is like huge to me. And that was an inspiration, even though he may not have been directly inspirational, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so between the teachers and the counselors and watching the resolve with which my father did the things that he did, that was enough to give me the confidence and the courage to know that I did not need to be a product of my environment. I don't know exactly what it was, Gull, but I just remember very early saying, I don't want that, right? We lived in the projects. Most of my little girl friends, by the time we were 13, 14, they were having their first child. There was something in me that said, that's not what we're doing. We're going to be rich, right? It was initially rich because I just wanted lots of money because we didn't have any. And then over the time, it became, we're going to be wealthy. How do we become wealthy? That is what it was like in the midst of all of the money challenges that we experienced, right? I mean, lights cut off, fighting, not answering the door when the landlord came, like all the things that you might imagine in poverty, we experienced them. And those were ingrained into my subconscious and my conscious, and even flowered the way that I, as a young adult, showed up and why I ended up with $250,000 in credit card debt, having to file bankruptcy in my 30s.
I mean, yeah, I mean, everything that you've described thereafter as a money mindset coach, I see it as a matter of fact. Without you telling me, I would have told you there has to be element of bankruptcy or close enough to it. You have to go through cycles of near enough, self-sabotage before you sort of heal through the process and come out the other end. And when you come out the other end, you explode, but you have to go through the process, because I did myself.
Yeah, you have
Have
to.
those cycles.
And to be a teacher of that, right? Like one of the things that I do, I spend a lot of time with my clients helping them to shift the way they see themselves in money. Because if you believe that money is this arduous out there thing and it is not one with you, you won't have a lot of it.
Agreed.
And so getting them to the $1 million mark, there's some strategy involved, but there's many more subtle things that we need to deal with before we can get them to make that amount of money. And if I hadn't gone through it, I wouldn't recognize it. I wouldn't be able to guide, support, coach, and advise them through it, which would be a challenge for me to be the person that I am today had I not experienced what I experienced.
Great. I mean, money is something that there's one thing about making, and there's a second element to keeping it. And a lot of people can make it. I think far too many people can make it, but very few are able to keep it. And actually, even few are able to keep it from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing. And yeah, we have our, we have our own challenges. And I think every individual has to go through certain element of their own story. Coming back to you. So this young girl who built the self-belief that she can make a change. The financial what came later wasn't important to me, because I know that's your journey that had to happen later. I'm interested in this girl who had no reason to believe in herself, but chose to believe in herself because of through her teachers and through indirectly looking at what her father's doing, and chose that she's going to have a different life to the ones she has or with around her peers. And then she went on to become this young woman who went into corporate world. What made you give up your corporate cushioned wealthy life? I mean, for somebody who doesn't have any, corporate life is like, oh, because when you're in that environment, your idea of rich is working for the corporate world. I remember that was from when I was growing up. So my idea of being rich was I'm going to be a lawyer making, £100,000. Now that seems like peanuts to me. But when I was growing up, that was like that's me, I'm going to get there. So once you've achieved that corporate, level and lifestyle, and you apparently were doing really well, what made you give up that employed life, going forward, the self-employed, and try and have a business of your own? What was the motivating factor?
It's such a great question. I just realized that it was a training ground, but it was never supposed to be where I retired from. It was to give me the additional skill sets that I needed to come out into small business ownership and to be successful, to not be one of the statistics, right? And we've all seen
Yeah.
the terrible statistics that plague small business throughout the country, right? Or throughout the world, in addition to here in the United States. It was a lot of self-belief. I was too dumb to doubt Gull. Like, I was like, literally, if this doesn't work, I'm educated, I'm brilliant, like I can get another job, but I won't know if I have what it takes unless I take this chance. And I was young enough. I wasn't married yet, I didn't have children, so the stakes were not nearly as high, and it was the perfect time for me to see if I could do it.
I love that.
And
Yeah.
I just woke up one day in December the 17th, 2004. I will never forget it. I woke up with a knot in the pit of my stomach, and I just felt like something wasn't right. And this is my last day working for someone else. It was a very clear knowing as I got up, got ready, got in the car, got to the office, and literally stopped at my desk, wrote the quickest resignation letter I've ever written in my life, and printed it and took it into my boss, Carolyn. Like, literally, it was a very clear knowing. Although I didn't know what I was going to do next, I knew that I needed to bet on myself, and that if I did not do it then, I would never do it. And I shudder to think I'm 48 years old today. And I shudder to think what my life would be like if I never had the courage on December 17th, 2004, to quit my good job.
Well, and I want to emphasize a point here. You didn't have a plan in the sense that you didn't have money in the bank waiting for you to fall back on.
I did. I had money in the bank because
Mm.
I became a good steward. And let me tell you how. So when I was 16, well, when I was 13, I started working. I remember going to my father and asking him for $20. And he said, "Oh, you must think I have a tree out back with money on it. You have to work hard for money." So at 13, I got working papers and I got my first job at McDonald's. And my dad required that. He said I could work. I could work full time in the summers. I could work 15 hours during the school year each week, but I had to put half of every paycheck in the bank. So by the time I was 16, I had $7,500 saved. Well, I was a cheerleader, and one day I did not have cheerleading practice. And so I got home and I got the mail and I got my bank statement. And when I opened my bank statement, instead of having $7,500, I had $34.19. And when my father came home, yes, your face, when my father came home after I paced the floor and almost put a hole in it, and I told him that my money was missing, he flippantly said, "Oh, you thought you were living here for free." He basically took my money because he was the co-signer on. I was too young to have bank accounts in my own name exclusively. And I learned a very valuable lesson that day. And so as a result of that, I became a hoarder of money. I started to watch my money like a hawk. That was the beginning of me self-educating from a financial literacy standpoint. I didn't do enough because I still ended up filing bankruptcy with a lot of credit card debt, but I really started to pay attention to money. So even in my corporate job, I learned how to live on half. So I put half of every paycheck. Some of it went into 401k, which I didn't touch, and some of it went into, liquid savings. So by the time I left my job, I was making $120,000 a year. I had more than six figures in savings.
Okay.
So I had a backdrop to fall back on while I was figuring out what I was going to do. My problem was I didn't change my lifestyle. I
Ah,
still lived like I was getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. And so that money ran out relatively quickly. And then I lived on my credit cards until I was at the limit on every card and there was nothing else I could do. And that's what precipitated me filing bankruptcy as I went back to work, because it was like, okay, I'm not making any money. I don't want to live in my car. Let me get a job. Because I knew that I'd be able to get a job, but I also knew that I was supposed to be an entrepreneur. So I needed to figure out what I didn't yet know so that I would be able to sustain myself and never have to work again. And here we are 14 years later.
so if we go back to that period in 2004, What would you do differently from, but the sounds of it, you did have money in the as a buffer zone.
Mhm.
And what I'm hearing, it doesn't matter what amount of money you have, it runs out. If you're not adding to it, it's going to eventually run out. So
Yeah.
hence, the pension issue that we have with lots of people, getting to that level now. No amount of money is enough, because if you're living to 80, 100, the
Right.
money will eventually run out unless you put it into the right sort of vehicles. What advice would you give to that younger self? I know you still do the same thing, but how would you do it differently? What have you learned that will, and this is the reason why I'm asking this question, is because there's probably many people listening to this
Oh, absolutely.
conversation, and they probably are in corporate jobs, and they're thinking, okay, I'm going to move, but how do I move? And okay, I've got about, maybe 100,000 or 120,000, 150,000 in the bank account, in my pension or my saving, whatever.
Mhm.
What can I do, and what lessons can they learn from you?
Yeah, so there's three distinct things that I would say. Number one, once you get an inkling that you want to start your own business, get the support you need to create a business plan. In the United States, through the Small Business Administration, there are business centers that will support you for free or very low cost and creating a viable business plan that would also help you to get access to capital. Seek out one of those resources to
Okay.
create a plan, right? And in creating that plan, the most important things you want to know is what's the problem you want to solve and for whom. And you want to make sure that you have a viable enough market that you will be able to pull income out of. Even if you have savings, my recommendation is that you don't look to quit your job until your side business is making enough money to at least match what you make at your job,
Okay.
because now you know that you have savings. And the game I play with myself today, Gull, is that I don't ever touch my goal is to never touch savings. I have a cash reserve account for my business. The game is to never touch it. The goal is to have the business run the business
Mm.
and pay for the business. So the business has to be yielding revenue on a consistent basis for us to operate. I would teach you to play that game with yourself as an employee, starting a side business with a desire to eventually be in that business full time. So once you're at least matching what you bring home every 2 weeks or every month, then I would start making a transition plan. And then in my transition plan, my goal would be to double that.
Mm.
Get to it first, because here's what once you start making money in a side business. You have something viable because other people are willing to give
Yeah.
you
You,
money
you,
to
you have a
solve their
business.
problem.
Yeah. You have a viable business. Before that, it's a hobby.
Correct. And so, because you know that, you can increase your volume to double what you earn. Right? So do that first, do that consistently for at least 3 months. Because once you've been doing it for 3 months, we can make the case that you know what you're doing and you can continue it. You've also been through a potential cycle in the market, in the industry that you're in, because it's been 90 days. And you can evaluate, you can run a SWOT analysis on what happened to see what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, what the opportunities and what the threats are, and how you can continue to improve upon the plan that you first established before you quit your job, while you were working it very part-time, so that when you actually have full-time hours to devote to your job, to your business, you can give it the same respect you used to give your job. That would be the first piece of advice.
Perfect. I think that's invaluable. I do believe that you need to have a plan. The
Mhm.
gym. I remember the famous quote from Jim Rohn: "If you fail to plan, you plan to fail." So you
Correct.
need to have a form of a plan, but don't let that cause you to procrastinate for years on end. It doesn't have to
Correct.
be a perfect plan. There has to be some sort of plan. And I do agree with you. If you want to have a business and you want to move away from the corporate world, especially if you have a lifestyle that you have to fund, which involves wife and kids, or husband and kids, and house and bills and so forth. It's a lot simpler when you're single. It's a lot more complicated when you have kids involved and their
Yes.
activities. And if you're in corporate world, there are certain lifestyle issues that you have. So you need to have a plan to be able to fund those things. And the best thing way is, like you said, don't leave your day job until your side hustle matches at least what your day job does,
Yeah.
and make sure that this and any business contains risk, but you have to take calculated risks,
Yes.
not unnecessary risks. I think a lot of people want to jump the gun and take unnecessary risks. I've done that, and I've learned that the hard way, and I've had my hands burnt.
Oh, me too. Like, I mean, hello, did you not hear me? Right? Don't do what I did, do what I say.
Yeah.
Do what I know now
Yeah,
looking back.
exactly. Learn from my mistakes. No, don't
Yes,
don't don't repeat my
absolutely.
mistakes, right? Yeah, I agree with you. That's
Absolutely.
fantastic. So now here's another very, very important part I want to ask you. When you filed for bankruptcy, that has a lot of shame and taboo attached to it. How did you not let that impact your self-esteem and your self-worth? And how did you navigate the path through that? Because that's a difficult path and it's a difficult
It is.
conversation to have. Even if you have a partner, if you don't have a partner, even with family and friends, it's a very difficult conversation to let people know that you're losing your home, you have no assets because you're now bankrupt.
Right. Right.
You're starting from sub-zero, and for a certain period of time, you can't even borrow or do anything because you're not allowed to, right? So talk me through how did you deal with that?
Yeah. So I'll first say I should have filed bankruptcy at least 2 years before I actually did it.
I can imagine that because we all try to push it as much as possible.
I was so worried because it's a public record. It's going to go in the paper. I live in Delaware. We're the second smallest state in the United States. We do not have 1 million people in our state. It's very small. Everybody knows everybody. And I'm going to be in the paper, and it's not going to be for something good. It's going to be for the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened in my life. I remember when I did finally file bankruptcy and I get to the bankruptcy court, someone I went to high school was there. I was
Mhm.
so I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. So it was absolutely a source of shame. It was not something I wanted to do. And I fully intended, Gull, to take filing bankruptcy to my grave. So I did actually do it. It was a non-event. No one called me on the phone. No one talked about me. I mean, we did have social media at that point. No one posted on social media, hey, Darnyelle filed bankruptcy. It was a non-event. Um, and I planned to never tell anyone. And one day I was speaking on stage and it slipped out. It literally slipped out. And it's one of those things where it slips out and you want to see if you can get it to go back in and you're looking, did anybody actually hear what I just said? And they heard me.
Mm.
And what I realized is that it made me human.
Yeah.
It gave the people in the room who maybe had their own financial issues that they were working through confidence and courage, because within a year of filing bankruptcy, Gull, I was a millionaire.
Mm.
Within 3 years, I had $1 million business. So it actually was probably the best thing I ever did. So to answer your question, how did I get over it? I forgave myself. There's a lot of power in forgiveness. And
No, yeah.
forgiveness, I define forgiveness as removing or releasing the obligation to still be held to who you used to be when you made that mistake, whether it was someone who did something to me, not expecting them to still be that same exact person, to give them grace that maybe they've grown and evolved and they're different now, and no longer holding them. And so for myself, when I forgive myself, sure, I made some really bad decisions. And as a result of that, the consequence was that I ended up having to file bankruptcy. It sucked, but guess what? It didn't kill me. It didn't change anything important about me. It actually gave me an opportunity to start over and to do things different and better. And so I picked myself up. The other thing that happened uniquely, and I don't know if this is I don't know if it's a state of Delaware thing. I don't know if it was just because I was filing bankruptcy thing, but my bankruptcy trustee required that in order to discharge my debt, I had to take a financial literacy course.
Mhm.
And so I had learned some things, but I clearly didn't learn all of the right things, hence $250,000 on credit cards. And so taking that financial literacy course really was a game changer for me. Not only did I learn the ins and outs of money in the traditional financial system, in the United States, in the world, but I also learned about the energy and the spirituality and the neuroscience of money.
Mm.
And between those two things coming together for me, it created the backdrop that today allows me to be worth 8 figures,
Mm.
running a multi-million-dollar company and helping others become the same. So it was something that happened for me, not to me.
Of
I am
course.
not a victim of it.
Of course.
I am a victor over it, and it humanizes me. I think, when you're a person like me or like you, we have our own platform. I travel around the world and I speak on stages with thousands of people in the audience, and you look like you have it all figured out and perfect. And when people understand that you too have experienced adversity, it makes you human. That if they cut you, you too would bleed, and that makes you more likable, right? We know, business owners know, that Marketing 101 says people will buy when they know you, like you, and trust you. And when
Yep.
you humanize yourself, when you are transparent and vulnerable about what you've been through, because no one goes to bed a blunder and wakes up a wonder. Everyone has a journey and a story and things they've been
Absolutely.
through.
Absolutely. And the higher up you go, the harder the road you have to trudge through. There is no way around it. There is no shortcut to
This is
success.
correct.
I don't believe that at all. And anyone who has phenomenal success, has extraordinary success, has led an extraordinary life with extraordinary hardships. And the
Yeah.
only way at the top is through hardships. I don't see any other way.
Yeah. I
And
say all the time, failure comes before success everywhere, even in the dictionary. Like,
100%, 100%. I love that. I didn't know that actually. That's actually very true. It is. It does come before success, and it's 100% true. And not just
yeah,
one failure, multiple failures,
multiple
because you
failures.
have to develop that character who's able to reach that pinnacle of success. I think the failures teach us humility on the way, because I think anyone who's successful has elements of talent with them, and obviously and hard work. That can make you cocky. That can make you arrogant. I think this is a universal thing. It's a way to teach us humility on our journey. When you reach the top, you could be the top of the world, but look where you got there, and some universal energy, this God, you can call it God, divine source, universal energy, whatever you want to call it. I call it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, helps you to develop your character as you're working towards your goals and success.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that it is important to understand that it is part of the journey, but that failure is really feedback. And you have an opportunity whenever something goes awry to evaluate it and determine how you're going to turn it into more of a success the next time.
100%, 100%. On that note, we're going to wrap up. We could carry on talking forever. You are such a fascinating person, Dr. Darnyelle. But tell us, Dr. Darnyelle, how can we connect with you? Where can we find you on the internet?
Yes, if you go to movetomillions.com.
Wonderful. So if you are listening to us on the podcast, the link that Dr. Darnyelle just mentioned and all her other social media links will be in the show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, then down below in the description section, we'll have all the links for her too. Do check her out and see how she can help you get to your next or first seven figures. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Darnyelle. We have to have you back for Money Talkies. But today, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to me and Dr. Darnyelle today on Friday Feature. I will be back with another amazing guest, finding out how they changed their life by changing their mindset. Until the next time we meet, this is Gull Khan signing off. Take care and bye for now.